George Barna is the founder of the Barna Group, and that organization specializes in doing market research related to religion and culture. The Barna people have said that only 9% of professing evangelical Christians hold to a biblical worldview. Just 9%. Meaning that the other 91% of professing evangelicals hold to an alternate, non-biblical, unchristian worldview. That's a frightening statistic. So from time to time, since I don't want that statistic, that 9% to be characteristic of our congregation, from time to time I'm going to present messages on the biblical responses to different cultural issues. And this is going to be one of those messages in two parts. Probably you have never heard a message in church on this subject. I hadn't either, so I decided I wanted to hear one. This is the biblical response to environmentalism. The current societal mantra is the word green. Green. Everything is green. We are constantly being told to go green. Some grocery stores require patrons to bring their own reused shopping bags, and plastic is frowned upon. There's now a serious movement to prohibit off-road dirt biking because it supposedly creates unwanted ruts in the hills. Ignoring the fact nature itself causes unwanted massive cracks in the hills. We call that earthquakes. There's an increasing push to go to a strict vegan diet, meaning no meat, fish, or dairy products. One of the strongest proponents behind veganism is famous film director James Cameron. Remember his movies, Terminator 1 and 2, Titanic, Avatar, and on and on. Cameron is now a vegan, not because of health reasons, and that's a legitimate reason to be vegan, but because of ethical reasons, meaning his personal opposition to animal consumption. Because according to environmentalists, animal consumption destroys the Earth's biosphere. And then in April, environmentalists have scheduled World Day for Animals in Laboratories. It is supposed to be an international humanitarian focus on the millions of experimental animals exploited in lab toxicity tests and disease research. I just read something that might relate to that protest. Henrik Ibsen, the 19th century Norwegian playwright, said to be the most important playwright since Shakespeare. More than 1 century ago, Henrik said, quote, don't miss this, "It is inexcusable for scientists to torture laboratory animals. So let them instead conduct their experiments on journalists and politicians." That was prophetic. I think he's onto something. I might add the U.S. federal government, and especially this present administration, has an aggressive green agenda and is spending billions, notice billions of taxpayers' dollars, on, quote, green energy companies, although to date, 36 of those companies are now bankrupt or are downsizing and going through employee layoffs. And this is not meant to be a political partisan commentary. That's not what this message is about. But there is a going green hysteria out there. But sometimes green is good and a smart thing to do. Home construction has gone green. Home insulation inside house walls is now available in recycled denim. Denim is the stuff jeans are made from. Some kitchen countertops are now made totally from recycled plastic. Wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, waste, biomass, and solar are being used as increasing sources of alternatives to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are coal, petroleum, and natural gas. And we are being encouraged to avoid fossil fuels if possible because those substances are said to pollute the environment. I recently stopped off at a mid-sized church campus. I have this bad habit if I see a church that looks different or interesting, I check it out. And stopped off there and met someone there that gave me a brief tour. probably multiple buildings, probably about 30,000 square feet of buildings. This church operates entirely on solar energy. I was fascinated. I said, so what's the bill like? In a recent month, their total utility bill, $9.45. I go, so how do I get that? So there is sometimes an economic advantage to going green, and that's a good thing. Probably most people haven't heard of the Cornwall Alliance. The Cornwall Alliance has existed as an organization since 2000 and is a coalition of conservative clergymen, theologians, scientists, and policy experts that are committed to a more biblical and balanced approach to the environment. It promotes a free market position on environmental care and rejects claims of man-made climate change or, quote, global warming alarmism. It argues that environmentalism as a movement represents another worldview, either secular or atheistic or Eastern mystical pantheistic worldview. The word environmentalism is not a bad word per se, and there are some legitimate and good components to the environmental movement. So I want that to be understood. That movement is almost impossible to define, though, because it is so diverse. Some members are sane and sensible and smart about this subject, and some are on the absolute lunatic hysterical fringe. But throughout this message, I'm going to use the term environmentalism as a reference to the more extreme elements of the environmental movement. Radical environmentalist activist, in street vernacular, tree huggers, environmentalist wackos, as some might call them. The Cornwall Alliance Group has renamed the extremist movement as the Green Dragon. The Green Dragon. And so throughout these messages, we're going to discuss the most appropriate biblical reaction to that green monster. Most all mainline Protestant denominations and ecumenical organizations are promoting the Green Dragon movement. One example is the annual Earth Day movement and celebration. More than 1 billion people are participating in that celebration, and the website dedicated to that celebration has an entire section encouraging, quote, faith communities, such as ours, to promote the environmental movement. It's interesting that Earth Day is held each April 22nd. That happens to be the birthday of Vladimir Lenin, one of the founders of Marxist-Leninist communism. I found that an interesting coincidence, since radical environmentalist activists tend to be more sympathetic to socialism and communism than to the free enterprise system. In fact, environmentalist Helen Callacott from the Union of Concerned Scientists made the statement, quote, capitalism is destroying the earth. I agree, some capitalists motivated from unbridled greed might be contributing to that problem, but not compassionate capitalism. One reason I'm addressing this subject is because inside the evangelical church, there seems to be a gross ignorance and misunderstanding as to the appropriate Christian response to the environment and environmentalism. One misunderstanding or misconception is called the utilitarian position. Utilitarian position. That position argues that the earth belongs to mankind. In Ronald Reagan's first term as president, he had appointed a controversial gentleman to the Secretary of the Interior. He was a professing evangelical. His name was James Watt. Mr. Watt authored an article entitled, quote, "Ours is the earth. Ours is the earth." He said that the earth is, quote, "merely a temporary way station on the road to eternal life." That is basically a true statement. But then the Interior Secretary continued to argue that God placed the earth here for his people to subdue and use for profitable purposes on the road to the hereafter. And that statement left open the door to the ecological abuse. One conservative Fox News contributor and professing Christian, although that's questionable to me from what I've seen and heard, This person is a social and political commentator, and is said to have made the statement, quote, God gave us the earth. God said the earth is yours. Take it, violate it, it's yours. No, I'm sorry. The earth is not ours. That is the utilitarian position, and the biblical rebuttal to that position is found here in Psalm 24. Psalm 24, verse 1. The earth is the Lord's. The earth is whose? The Lord's. And all its fullness. Meaning God owns the earth and owns all that the earth contains. The verse continues, the world and those who dwell therein. Meaning God also owns the human population. This is not an isolated statement because this verse is restated in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 26. And the reason God is said to own the earth and all that means is found in the second verse. Verse 2, for he, meaning God, has founded it, meaning God laid the earth's foundation upon the seas and established it upon the waters. God owns the earth and God owns the environment because he created it. And it is only on loan to us. As humans, we might, during our lifetime, possess a part of the earth, but we actually own nothing. God made the earth, and so he owns the earth. And our assignment from him is to manage the earth. In biblical language, we are called on to be stewards. A steward is not a word we use often. The word steward in simplistic language means manager. So we are stewards of the earth, meaning managers of the earth and of the environment. And that is reinforced in Psalm chapter 8. So go back some pages to Psalm chapter 8. Starting at verse 3, famous passage here. David said, verse 3, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. Now notice verse 6. You, meaning God, have made him, meaning man, to have dominion over the works of your hands, meaning over creation. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the seas. In summation, God owns the earth, God owns the environment and the ecosystems, but we are to be good managers of all those things he has loaned to us. But the earth is not ours to misuse and abuse because the earth is God's. So that's a misunderstanding the evangelical church has often about this subject. Then one of the basic things Green Dragon advocates don't understand is that man has been created in imago Dei. Imago Dei, in the Latin language, that phrase, imago Dei, means the image of God. The fact man was created in the image of God is mentioned 3 times in Genesis. The first time is found in chapter 1. So let's do this. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Should be able to find it. It's at the beginning. Genesis 1. It's interesting. I have a friend who visited a quasi-postmodern congregation, but definite conservative evangelical congregation in the Portland area called Imago Dei Community. Unique name for a church. Genesis 1, verse 26 and 27. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. The fact man was created imago Dei means man has the highest value of anything on earth. Nothing on earth has more intrinsic value than does humankind, because man was created in the image of God, and nothing else was. The Imago Dei sets humans apart from the rest of creation. But environmentalist extremists don't understand that and argue that humans are the problem. Humans are the source of all evil to the environment. Radical environmentalist John Davis, editor of the, quote, Earth First Journal, made the statement, "I suspect that eradicating smallpox was wrong, because smallpox played an important part in balancing the ecosystem." Meaning, according to him, deaths from smallpox epidemics were helpful because those deaths curbed human population increase. Mr. Davis also said, quote, "Human beings have no more value than slugs." Have you ever seen a slug? Contrast that stupid statement to the fact man has been created imago Dei. Dr. Cal Beisener, chief spokesman or spokesperson from the Cornwall Alliance, said that radical environmentalists teach that humans should be breeding or bearing children in a manner that puts as little input upon this earth as possible, because these people despise industrialized societies. One classic example of that description is from Pentti Unkola. She made the incredible statement that, quote, "Everything we have developed as a society over the past century should be destroyed." People outside the church sometimes accuse Christians of holding to a theology that encourages the exploitation of the environment. In fact, a 1967 edition of Science magazine, a cultural historian and professor named Lynn White Jr. authored a controversial article that was called "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." And that article was reprinted in thousands of college textbooks. And in that paper, he made the case that the Bible gives humans license to exploit nature because it sets man above nature. So he argued that Christians are using this thought that God permits us to exploit nature, and we're using the Bible to reinforce that thought, and he felt like that we are the problem. In fact, Professor Lynn taught at Princeton, at Stanford, and UCLA, and in his article he argued that the Judeo-Christian tradition was the root cause of the current, quote, ecological crisis. He's wrong. The problem is that professor completely misunderstood the biblical position on the earth and on the environment. The biblical position is that man was created to use the environment, not created to misuse the environment. In fact, in 1554, the famous Protestant reformer and theologian John Calvin said that man was committed to, quote, "a responsible care and keeping that does not neglect, injure, abuse, degrade, dissipate, corrupt, mar, or ruin the earth." And all modern evangelicals should agree to that statement. I'm going to go so far as to say it is a sin to abuse the environment. This morning I want to make 3 statements that describe the biblical response to the environment and radical environmentalism. Statement 1, God created the earth and the environment as a good thing. God created the earth and the environment as a good thing. I want us to turn, if we have left it, go back to Genesis 1. Genesis 1. Some of us might be aware of a religious heretical sect from the 1st and 2nd centuries called Gnosticism. In part, the New Testament book 1 John was written specifically to refute those false teachers we know as Gnostics. I might add, the word Gnostic and Gnosticism has been used in the media often. Some of us might remember Dan Brown's best-selling book and subsequent movie, The Da Vinci Code. He said it was factual, it is fictional. It was based on two Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary. It's interesting that the Gnostic Gospels, and there are others than those, the Gnostic Gospels were dated late 2nd century or the first part of the 3rd century. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were authored in the second half of the 1st century, closer to the actual time Jesus was on earth, and authored at the time there were eyewitnesses to what they wrote about. The Gnostic Gospels are not canonical for some of those reasons. An ancient Gnosticism argued that matter is completely bad, in fact, evil to them. Matter is bad. Spirit is completely good, but tangible matter is completely, according to Gnosticism, completely, utterly bad and evil. And since matter is bad, and since the earth and environment consist of matter, then according to Gnosticism, the earth and environment is bad. But God said that it was good. Genesis 1. Notice verse 4. This is creation. And God saw the light, that it was okay. God saw the light, and it wasn't bad. God saw the light, and it was what? Good. Verse 10. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 18, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from darkness, God saw that it was good. Verse 21, so God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 25, and God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 31, notice, after God has finished all his creating, and this is an editorial comment, I believe it happened in 6 literal 24-hour days. I don't believe in the day-age theory at all. It states, verse 31, then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Like chocolate. Very good. This passage we just read is probably where the phrase originated, God doesn't make junk. And he doesn't, and he hasn't. The fact is, nature and the environment is not a nuisance to be ignored or necessary evil to be endured and tolerated, but something good to be enjoyed because God made it to be good. Now think about this analogy. It is not possible to honor the famous, now deceased, the famous operatic tenor Luciano Pavarotti. It is not possible to honor Pavarotti and at the same time find his music unbearable. That's because his music was intrinsic to who he was. It is not possible to honor the famous French Impressionist painter Claude Monet and reject his artwork because his painting was intrinsic to who he was. I might add a footnote. In 2008, one of his paintings from his famous Water Lily series sold for more than $80 million. And get this, we just found out that most of his artwork was done with ordinary house paint. There's something to that Kelly Moore stuff, I'm telling you. Sherm Williams. In the same sense, people, it is not possible to honor the Creator God and then despise or abuse or misuse what He has created, because His creation is intrinsic to who He is as God. Now, some Christians have a different perspective on this. The prophetical fact is that this present earth has a temporary lifespan. In fact, it is scheduled to be renovated into a Garden of Eden-like environment at the beginning of the Messianic millennial period. After Jesus and His saints, meaning us, return to the earth, He establishes His Messianic kingdom. The first phase is a millennium, or 1,000 years. And the earth at the end of that period is going to be renovated at the end of that period. And it's going to be renovated through fire and another earth made out of it so that a new earth can endure throughout the eternal age. That's 2 Peter 3, verse 10. But because this earth in its present form is not permanent, then some Christians have the attitude and argue, well, since it's all going to burn up at some point anyway, then it doesn't matter what we do to it now. I mean, its shelf life is not that long. And so, since God's going to renovate it and make it all new at some point, it doesn't matter what we do. We can abuse it if we want, if it's to our advantage. So according to them and that logic, environmentalism and conservationism isn't a legitimate concern. I don't agree. Just think about how inconsistent that argument is. Our present bodies also have a short and temporary lifespan, correct? But we still exercise our bodies, or we should. Some exercise only people gets that finger muscle moving with a remote control. We still bathe our bodies, at least on Saturday nights. We still feed our bodies, too much more than we should. We clothe our bodies, and if our bodies get sick, we bring those bodies to the doctor, don't we? The fact is, we sometimes go to extreme measures to take care of our bodies, although eventually our bodies are going to die and turn into wormwood food. Isn't that going to happen? The same argument applies to the earth. The fact the earth as we now know it is ultimately going to be burned up is totally irrelevant to this discussion, because we are still obligated as stewards and managers to take care of it in the meantime. God made the earth and the environment good. Our job is to keep it good. Statement 2. God created man to both rule over and be responsible for the earth and its inhabitants. God created man to both rule over and be responsible for the earth and its inhabitants. Genesis 1. Again, I'm sorry, we're still there. This is called the dominion mandate, although this mandate is often misunderstood. Again, notice verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them," meaning mankind, "have dominion." Underline dominion. "Over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Verse 27, so God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him. Male and female, He created them. Verse 28, then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it." Underline subdue. "Have dominion." Underline dominion, over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, the relation that man is supposed to have to creation is that he is to have dominion over creation, and he is to subdue creation. Now, radical environmentalists that are biblically ignorant often assign a negative and unfortunate connotation to those terms, dominion and subdue. But that is not what God intended. Those are good words, not bad words. This term dominion in the Hebrew language means to reign, to rule, to govern, to bear, or be responsible for. It doesn't mean to terrorize and trash the earth. It doesn't mean to sabotage the fragile ecosystem. It doesn't condone littering. Dominion doesn't mean domination, as in the sense of an immoral and wasteful use of creation. Not at all. This statement that man is to subdue the earth means to oversee the operation of the earth and its inhabitants. This word subdue is a management term, and it emphasizes the fact humans were designed to be careful caretakers of nature. Now, environmentalist extremists want us to feel guilty because we drive automobiles, and in doing that emit exhaust into the atmosphere. Some environmentalism advocates get upset at us if we wear leather products. I mentioned earlier there's an anti-meat eating emphasis in modern environmentalism. I might inject that according to Acts chapter 10 and Romans chapter 14, in addition to other passages, someone has the freedom in Jesus Christ to be a vegan, a vegetarian, or a meat-eating carnivore. We have the freedom. If you feel God would have you be a vegan, great. If you feel more comfortable being a vegetarian, great. If you want to go with me to get a steak, better still. And there are good health reasons to avoid red meat and to only eat red meat in moderation. I understand all that. I'm just saying we shouldn't be legalistic about this. God gives us the freedom to select our personal preferences regarding diet. From a biblical perspective, those different diets are each permissible personal preferences. But environmentalist extremists don't permit us those preferences. And so there's more and more environmental extremism and hysteria out there. The Cornwall Alliance has a declaration on environmental stewardship that reads, humans are to be producers and stewards, and not consumers and polluters. And I agree. Statement 3. To exploit the earth and environment is basically selfish and affects other people negatively. To exploit the earth and environment and the ecological system is basically selfish, and it has a negative effect on other people. The basis of all environmental pollution is selfishness. It seems that man wants to profit from nature, but he doesn't want to put much back into nature. In third world countries, men cut down millions of trees, but then don't reforest those same areas. And that is wrong. Men use natural resources, but then don't recycle the waste products into a reusable form. I believe, this is my personal opinion, most intentional, purposeful abusers of the environment, people that just don't care, do so because it is monetarily advantageous to them. The fundamental problem is found in 1 Timothy 6:10. Don't turn there. Let me quote it. For the love of money, not money, for the love of, desire to have more of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and all kinds of evil includes environmental negligence and abuse. The increasing want to have a better bottom line and a bigger profit margin has motivated some people and some corporations to abuse and misuse the environment, and that is morally unacceptable. One horrific example, still in the media, it hasn't been settled, is the 2010 BP British Petroleum oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The particular oil rig, the BP oil rig called the Deepwater Horizon, exploded and sank, resulting in 11 immediate deaths. And then, throughout the next 87 days until that leakage was stopped, released 4.9 million barrels of oil into the ocean. I might add there is some indication that it is still leaking. That massive leakage of oil devastated marine wildlife and habitats, the fishing and tourism industries, and hundreds of human health complications. The fines and rebuilding efforts are into the billions and billions of dollars. Listen to this. A 2011 White House committee blamed British Petroleum and its partners, Transocean and Halliburton, for, quote, making a series of cost-cutting decisions. See, that's how we tend to operate according, well, what's the least expensive thing I can do? How can I make more money? That's one graphic example of putting potential dollars and cents profit above people and the environment. One Christian author said pollution is an inevitable consequence of an affluent society that values material progress above all else. And that sometimes describes us. The United States is number 61 on the environmentalist friendliest nations list. 61. The top 3 most ecological friendliest nations are Iceland, Switzerland, and Costa Rica. Iceland and Switzerland, I understand. They're just frozen over. Costa Rica, I'm not sure how they rank so high. The United States has just 2% of the Earth's total population, 2%, but uses, get this, 1/3 of the Earth's total resources. Meaning we are probably the most wasteful nation on Earth.
Yes, we are.
It is so strange to us. Now, we're just recovering Californians. It is so strange to us to move here and find no one recycling. It's completely foreign to us. One example of waste: that each 45 seconds, more than 250,000 metal and aluminum cans are mass produced. We drink soft drinks out of those and other beverages. If we recycled just one soda can, instead of tossing into the trash, it would save enough energy to watch 3 hours of television. Although those 3 hours of television could also be considered a waste. Just not that much good television on. Now notice Jesus' attitude toward wastefulness. Let's turn to John chapter 6. One more passage. John chapter 6. Because of time, I'm not going to be able to go through the entire section, but let me pick it up near the end. John chapter 6. Other than the resurrection of Jesus himself, the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle Jesus performed that is mentioned in all 4 gospel accounts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Meaning it is important. I might add that the text reads that Jesus fed 5,000 men, not counting women and children, so the actual total number Jesus fed might have been 20,000 or more. Notice verse 11, John 6. And Jesus took the loaves. Now, Jesus had received 5 loaves and 2 small fishes, and he'd multiplied that food in order to be able to feed this mass of people. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, notice, Christian, he bowed his head and thanked God for the food, something we should always do. He distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish. So, the people are eating fish sandwiches, all right? As much as they wanted. This was an all-you-can-eat meal, my kind of meal. Verse 12. So when they were filled, Jesus said to his disciples, notice, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Verse 13, therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Jesus wasn't wasteful. Jesus probably fed his disciples those leftovers that night, or he might have given those leftovers to other people that he found that had nothing to eat. But the point is, Jesus was not wasteful. And that statement is even more emphatic if we stop and consider that Jesus had unlimited resources available to him. Could he not have made another 1,000,000 sandwiches and still not have subtracted from his ability to make more sandwiches? Because Jesus was the God-man, he had unlimited, infinite resources, but he still did not tolerate wastefulness, and neither should we. I was embarrassed. I don't want to, I need to be careful how I say this, but I had a lunch recently. I was invited to lunch at a nice restaurant. A couple other pastors, and one of the pastors, good guy, but he sat there and I kept watching. He's not eating his food. And it was a Chinese restaurant. And she brought the soup out, and he chose the soup instead of the salad. I got the salad. And he said, I'm just not in the soup, so they brought it back. Oh, man, this is not good. Brought out his meal. I mean, he barely touched it. I thought, man, what are you doing? Give it to me. I'll eat it. I don't like to see food wasted. I'm just going, you're paying for this and you're wasting this food? I don't understand that. I was taught as a child, clean your plate. And that meant vegetables too. Wastefulness is wrong. Most scientists probably agree that the number one global problem from a scientific perspective, after cyber terrorism from China, is ecological terrorism. And the reason ecological terrorism is a serious problem is because pollution affects people other than ourselves. The principle is the environment is important in part because people are important. Pollution is wrong in part because of the serious negative and adverse effects it has on other people. Garbage affects sanitation, and the sanitation affects individual health. Sewage affects water sources and not only makes them unfit to drink, but renders them unrecreational and contaminates the fish and animal life that is in them. Smog forces good people to breathe bad air and causes shortness of breath, chest pains, and asthma attacks, and on and on. Our first church start was in Southern California. And I remember sometimes not being able to go outside and run or exercise because there were severe smog alerts. The earth and the environment is not to be misused by people because there are other people that use it. I understand that the largest direct class action lawsuit in the history of the United States was brought by 634 plaintiffs from Hinckley, California. Never been to Hinckley. I believe it's 47 miles north of Victorville in the Mojave Desert, an unincorporated community. Never been there. Have no desire to go there. But these plaintiffs from Hinckley brought this class action lawsuit against the Public Utility Corporation, PG&E. The resulting settlement in that suit amounted to $333 million, and the charge brought against PG&E was that using an element called hexavalent chromium in its compressor plants ultimately contaminated and poisoned the water supplies in that region, causing serious widespread sickness and death. That corporate abuse was chronicled in the 2000 movie Erin Brockovich, and is a classic illustration of how that hurting the environment hurts people. I mean, if you're aware of what's happening in the media, this just happened. Most recent example, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, the Marine base. From 1957 to 1987, people on base were exposed to drinking water contaminated with industrial solvents, benzene, and other cancer-causing chemicals. Altogether, more than 70 different dangerous chemical contaminants have been identified in those water sources at Camp Lejeune. One of the repercussions is now more than 20 men who were there have been diagnosed with breast cancer. Men. Extraordinarily high number considering that how rare breast cancer is among males. Less than 1% of all breast cancer victims are male. But there's an epidemic there now, among other serious health problems. It is extremely important that we care for the environment because of other people, not just ourselves. It's extremely important not only that we are careful custodians of the environment, but it is essential that we are ecological caregivers from the right motivation. That we do the right thing, but we do it from the right reason. More and more people supporting controversial environmental issues are doing that because these people see nature as a form of God. And that theological perspective is called pantheism. The term pantheism is derived from two words. The prefix pan means all, and theism means God. So pantheism means all is God. Pantheism is the belief that the entire earth is another form of God. God is said to be in all things, including the earth and the environment. God is in the mountains, God is in the trees, God is in the water, the air we breathe, and on and on. Understand that pantheism is a small part or a piece of the puzzle to what is called the New Age movement. This New Age movement as a whole has a strong emphasis on the environment and a, quote, oneness with nature. Because according to New Age proponents, nature is essentially God. Pantheism's partly the reason there are now more and more suicide attempts happening in national parks because of this desire to be one with nature in an ultimate sense. There's another term related to pantheism that is called animism. Animism is a New Age doctrine that natural objects such as rocks and trees and animals have a soul. To demonstrate just how much this New Age teaching has infiltrated secular society, as far back as 1995, the Disney Corporation produced an animated movie called Pocahontas, which I might add turned out to be a historical revision and distortion of the original Pocahontas account. Are you aware of the fact that Pocahontas converted to Christianity? Had her name changed to Rebecca? There's a song in that movie that in part sounded like this. Listen carefully. You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. Every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. That's animism. People, the point is nature is not God. And it is idolatrous to worship nature. And that's one reason as a Christian I cannot in good conscience celebrate, commemorate Earth Day, and I don't go out in the woods and sing songs to Mother Nature. I don't sing hymns as some clergy are recommending, singing hymns to Mother Earth. Instead, I sing hymns to Father God in heaven. Understand that if we pollute the earth, then because this earth is not God, we have not sinned against the earth, but we have sinned against other people that are affected adversely by what we did to the earth, and we have sinned against the God that created the earth and intended it to be good. Now listen carefully as I wrap this up. Most of us have heard of the term carbon footprint. Our carbon footprint can be defined as the sum total of all emissions from greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, CO2, that we create through our normal activities in a given time frame, such as the fossil fuel we burn on the ride to the office, the hair products we use, the double cheeseburger we bought at McDonald's. All these things combine together to create someone's carbon footprint, the total amount of all emissions from greenhouse gases. Current political correctness teaches that the greenhouse emissions from someone's carbon footprint are causing a deterioration in the Earth's ozone layer, and that is contributing to global warming and climate change. Let me repeat. Current political correctness teaches that the greenhouse emissions from someone's carbon footprint are causing a serious deterioration in the Earth's ozone layer, and that is contributing to global warming and climate change. Although, to be fair and balanced, according to the OISM, Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine, to date, 31,000 U.S. scientists have signed a petition rejecting that concept. 31,000 men and women that have earned graduate degrees in scientific disciplines from recognized secular universities argue that climate change is not man-made and is not because of accumulated carbon footprints. This petition states, quote, "There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing now or in the foreseeable future will cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate." Now, two sides to this question. It didn't help the greenhouse gas-affected climate change model, though, that in November 2009, we now understand, scientists at the University of East Angeles Hadley Climate Research Unit were caught falsifying statistical data in what was called the ClimateGate scandal. Caught falsifying data in order to fit the model they were being paid to produce in order to keep the government funding for their research. The point is, now I'm not here to, this is not here to argue this. The point is that climate change, man-made climate change, is an extremely controversial and heated debate. Pardon the pun. Heated debate. If climate change is man-made from our accumulated carbon footprints, as former Vice President Gore insists it is, or if it is a normal, natural, cyclical phenomena, as I tend to believe it might be, the point is, the public educational system, politicians as a whole, and the mainstream media are emphasizing again and again the ecological danger in the carbon footprint. The big thing people are talking about is individual and household carbon footprints. Someone can go to www.carbonfootprint.com and fill out an interactive online form to calculate his specific carbon footprint or eco-destruction number. I'm not suggesting someone do that, but it's there to do. The average U.S. household carbon footprint is 48 tons of CO2, carbon dioxide, per year, said to be some 5 times the global average. Now, someone's personal carbon footprint might have some ecological significance to some people, although me, not so much. To the Christian, though, I contend God is more concerned about another footprint, a spiritual footprint, a footprint that represents someone's likeness to Jesus Christ, someone's Christ-likeness footprint. And that's the footprint that matters most. Remember Romans 8:28? For all things work together for good to those who love God, to those called according to his purpose. And then verse 29 goes on to define the ultimate purpose God has called each Christian to, and that is to be conformed to the image of his Son. The ultimate end and objective of the practical sanctification process is for us to resemble Jesus. God can take even the bad, the good, the bad, and even the ugly, and can use them for our good to help us in that process of conforming us to resemble Jesus. That's our Christ-likeness footprint. Christianity might be defined as Jesus Christ coming into an available human body and then being permitted to act like himself. Permitted to act like himself to the extent in and through us that we resemble more and more of Jesus and less of ourselves. And that is the Christ-likeness footprint. The unfortunate fact is some Christians have a Christ-likeness footprint that is almost undetectable. And that's sad. And then some have matured in Christian commitment to have an unmistakable, undeniable Christ-like footprint. Former President Woodrow Wilson, 28th president, this account, he recounts an incident that happened to him on a routine visit to the barber shop. And this happened prior to his being elected president. He said this, quote, I was sitting in a barber chair when I became aware that a powerful personality had entered the room. It seems a man had come in upon the same errand as myself to have his hair cut. And he sat in the chair next to me. Every word the man uttered, though it was not in the least didactic, showed a personal and sincere interest in the man who was serving him. And before I got through with what was being done to me, I was aware that I had attended an evangelistic service because Mr. D.L. Moody was in that chair. I purposely lingered in the room after he left and noticed the singular effect that his visit had brought upon the barber shop. The men talked in undertones. They didn't know his name, but they knew that something had just elevated their thoughts. And I felt that I left that place as I should have left a place of worship. People, that is the size and significance of the spiritual Christ-likeness footprint we ought to be creating wherever we are. Let's bow our heads. Father, I know I've addressed some controversial matters, and I certainly haven't been thorough in discussing all the options or alternatives or opinions. Hopefully I've stimulated thought. I guess the big idea that I want us to take home is that we are Christian stewards or managers of all you have loaned to us during this lifetime, and you have assigned us the earth, the environment, the ecosystems, to be caregivers of all that, to be careful caregivers, to treat what you have created with respect, not to abuse it, not to misuse it, not to neglect it, not to ignore it, to do the right thing that would glorify you. I know we're going to talk a little more next week about this and bring up some other issues, but I just pray, God, that that's the message that we'll have gotten through, and that ultimately what matters most is not what, someone's carbon footprint, but someone's Christ-likeness footprint. The resemblance to your Son, Jesus. That's what matters most. Help us to remember that. And help us to determine to be as close as we can to showing people what he is really like. Remembering that we might be the only Jesus someone ever sees. Thank you for your word. Thank you for our time. Continue to bless our people, those who are hurting, those who have needs. Continue to minister to them. Help us all to remember that as a Christian, still everything that happens to us, you can use and work for our good. You can help it in the process of conforming us to the image of your Son, and we thank you for that. To know there's a purpose behind every problem. Thank you. And I ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand to our feet.